Hey guys, the Chinese manufacturer Oppo finally announced their latest flagship device, the Oppo Find 7, and they actually announced two variants of this. One of them is a very premium device with really high-end specs. That's the one I'm going to be focusing on in this video. The other variant is still a pretty high-end device, but it's not quite as high on the spec sheet, and it also is going to be at a cheaper price. I'll mention that at the end of the video. Now, you can see images of the device right here. It's a pretty square device, looks like it's got pretty sharp edges. Obviously, I haven't held this device, so I can't tell you for sure, and it is a large device as well. The screen comes in at 5.5 inches, so you are going to need pretty big hands to hold and use this device comfortably, especially reaching for that status bar and things like that. But I know a lot of people like their big phones, so this might be great for you. Now, there was a lot of rumors about this device. Some people said it was going to have a 50 megapixel camera. Some people said it was going to have a QHD screen with a crazy resolution, and that's what we're going to be checking out today. So I've got the specs coming up. Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so here we go. Now, don't forget, these are the specs for the premium version of the Oppo Find 7. I will try and go through the specs of the other variant at the end of the video. We'll start off with the dimensions. You can see it's 9.2 millimeters thick and weighs 173 grams. That's a little bit thicker and a little bit heavier than something like the Note 3, but that's just a little bit of interesting information for you guys. It doesn't really mean too much because these phones are pretty different. Let's move over to the display. Now, it does come with a really high resolution, as the rumors suggested, 2560 by 1440. That actually makes it a QHD display, which means Quad HD, and that actually means it has 4 times as many pixels as a 720p display. So it's kind of crazy. It's 5.5 inches in size, and that equates to 534 ppi. So again, that number is just insane as well. Now, we know what makes a good display is not always just the resolution. You need to take into account color reproduction and viewing angles. So we won't know how good this display is until we actually play with it and see what it's like. But the spec sheet show it to have a crazy resolution, so that's going to be interesting. Don't know what that's going to mean for performance and gaming performance and things like that. Of course, it's going to be more stressful for the GPU, so we'll have to see what happens. Does have Gorilla Glass 3 here, and if we scroll down, you'll see it does have a micro SD card slot up to 64 gigabytes. Comes with 32 gigabytes built in, and it does have 3 gigabytes of RAM as well. So it has matched the Sony Xperia Z2 in the RAM department. Okay, so moving on to the camera here, and you can see it doesn't have a 50 megapixel sensor, it only has a 13 megapixel sensor. I say only 13, but 13 is still pretty damn awesome. But Oppo have included some really clever software that basically allows it to stitch 4 or 5 photos together and create a 50 megapixel picture. So that's how they're actually doing it. I believe how it works is it takes 10 images, it then takes 4 or 5 of the best images and stitches them together, making a 50 megapixel shot. There are some samples out on the web if you want to go and check those out. They do look pretty decent, but you know, it's not all about megapixels. 13 is still a pretty good number, so there's nothing to worry about there. In terms of what it can record at, you can see it can do 2160p at 30 frames per second, 1080p at 30 frames per second, and 720p at 120 frames per second. So you're probably going to look at 720p slow motion, which is pretty sweet. The front-facing camera is 5 megapixels, and that's pretty big. I haven't seen a front-facing camera with that many megapixels. That'll be quite interesting to see what kind of quality those shots are for things like hangouts or selfies. Who cares? But yeah, in terms of the OS, it's running an Android OS. I believe it's actually called Color OS, and I think it's based on Jelly Bean, which is a little bit disappointing. I would have assumed they'd base it on KitKat, but nonetheless, that's what they've done. One great thing about Oppo is they basically, I think they do bi-monthly updates. So 2 times a month, you're going to get OTA updates, and you can update the OS, and they'll include loads of features. If you want to suggest them, you can suggest them, and they may in fact include them. So there's loads of stuff. It's got loads of development going on as well. In terms of the chipset, it does have the Snapdragon 801, and it is the better version of the 801. This is the same one the Galaxy S5 is using, quad-core 2.5 gigahertz, and the overclocked Adreno 330 as well. So it is a powerhouse, and it's going to need to be, especially running games at that crazy resolution we saw earlier. Scrolling down here, what we got? The battery is a 3000 milliamp hour battery, so a pretty huge battery as well, as you'd expect from quite a big device. We'll have to see how that holds up. One interesting note about the battery is Oppo actually said it can charge from 0 to 75% in 30 minutes, which is crazy fast charging time, and that's always handy. So the other version basically doesn't have the high resolution display. It only has, I say only has, but it has a 1080p display. I'm not sure if it's the same size, but what I do know is it has 2 gigabytes of RAM. It has also the Snapdragon 800, and it has a 2800 milliamp hour battery. So it's kind of, you know, a step down from this version, which is pretty obvious considering it's going to be a cheaper device. Now, in terms of its release date, I believe the other variant is actually being released first, and I think that's being released in April. The premium version with this high-end display, I believe, is going to be released sometime in the summer. But again, don't quote me on that. That's what I read. So there you go, guys. You can see that in terms of the specs, this thing is going to be hard to beat. It's pretty much packed to the brim with all the latest specs you can possibly get. So yeah, let me know what you guys think of this. It's always quite hard to actually get your hands on an Oppo device, especially if you're like me and you're in the UK. But yeah, let me know what you think of the specs. Peace out.